Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and so we're doing Garfield because once again I am running behind and also because I like Garfield. So, yeah. Let's talk Garfield. The thing about Garfield is that Garfield is, despite frequently and often and, muchly being a cat, and so, I like him because cats. But Garfield is also immensely relatable because he is, of course, also, metaphorically speaking, human. And so you have relatability in various ways. Like, you have kind of the relatability of that feeling of those things that we personally care about because we don't care about whatever the other person is talking about. We each have our own things. Like, we have this particular strip where John comes home and he's telling Garfield about he was in the bakery buying a cake when 3 midgets in gorilla costumes raced in and set the place on fire and ran out with the cash register. And Garfield only cares about whether or not the cake has chocolate or vanilla frosting, because that's what's important to Garfield. And, we all have our things like that, where somebody can be talking about something that's important to them, and it may even be something that's actually genuinely important, and you're more focused on something else. And it's relatable. I mean, at the same time, of course, it is funny, and Garfield and food and haha and John's exasperation, it's all there. But there's a relatability to that. There's a relatability to this one. And now a word from our sponsor. We guarantee in writing that if you buy our products, we will make more money than you do. The kind of commercial that I think we've all wanted at some point. The commercial that just owns up to the fact that we are a company and we are trying to sell you a product in order to make ourselves a profit. And we will do what we have to do in order to make a lot of money off of you buying our stuff. And Jim Davis occasionally did these. This isn't really political, it's not deep social commentary, but that's sort of that light social commentary, that cynical awareness, that Garfield is really, really good at a light cynical awareness. It's not a deeply cynical comic. It's not something where every single moment in this comic you have this unbearable razor-sharp awareness of the flaws of humanity and all kinds of things like that. It's that cynicism of the laid-back observer who watches stuff and, without even making an effort, can see that something is just, kind of hinky, and thus appreciates this. That's refreshingly direct. Then you have this, a classic variant on the I Hate Mondays, and this is the relatable of we've all been there. The kind of morning where you've been up for 2 minutes and it feels like 2 days. If I can just make it to my coffee, I'll be all right. And that moment when he flops down beside his coffee cup and can't quite make it, and John, infinitely amused, says, "So close and yet so far." Because, so close and yet so far. I think I may have gotten something on the surface of my scanner, because there's a dot there on the same spot that's not going anywhere. Dang it, now I'm going to have to figure out what's going on with my scanner. Anyways, so there's that. There's also the fact that John, in this one actually, John is more ridiculous in other collections than in this one. In this one, it's really quite rare that John is ridiculous. John is more the tired, exasperated cat owner in this one. So, this thing of John basically being like somebody's tired dad, that you need more vegetables in your system, and hands Garfield some spinach, and Garfield has a panic attack flailing the spinach in all directions as John sighs and tells him not to be so melodramatic. And again, I think this is a moment that's relatable on both ends, really, because I think we all remember being, like, 6 years old and our parents try to make us eat that food that we hate, and we're just, like, flailing in all directions because if we can just pretend that we're dying enough, our parents won't make us eat it. Or if we happen to have that tomato juice that we violently dislike and then throw up 3 times overnight, that maybe no one will ever make us drink tomato juice ever again because that was vile. Um, I'm sorry, I just drifted off there for a moment. Let's not talk about my tomato juice based trauma. But at the same time, you have that tired parent other side, which I think, I've never been a parent because children are the worst. But I think every parent has that moment that John is having of stop being so melodramatic, Garfield, as their child flails and shrieks because they don't want to eat the spinach. Um, it's kind of a classic. But at the same time, John is still always going to be this guy. The guy who says, "Give me one good reason why you won't go out with me," and Liz responds, "You're obnoxious, pushy, wishy-washy, slow-witted, and boring." And John is slow-witted enough that he says, "Oh yeah, well, give me a second reason," because he's slow-witted. I would argue, by the way, to anybody who's going to say that he is being a nice, registered trademark guy, that he's not being a, quote, nice, unquote guy. John is just sometimes not that bright, and sometimes he's not bright enough to understand that obnoxious, pushy, wishy-washy, slow-witted, and boring is, in fact, not one reason. It's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it's 5 reasons. That he's just not bright enough to figure that one out, which is why Garfield is smiling. But the thing is, he's also the guy where if he says, "What would I have to do to get you to go out with me?" and if Liz tells him, "Stand in your head and scream like a chicken," he'll do it. Because dignity is not in this man's vocabulary, and he's that desperate. And Liz is dealing with somebody who will not say no. Like, John is never going to become somebody who is never going to become an incel type who blames all women for everything, because he's going to take people at their word about a lot of stuff, like the standing on his head and screaming like a chicken. So the thing about these is that, yes, they're wild and they're vaguely insane, and John is pretending he's a chicken because he thinks it will get him a girlfriend. But, like I said, there's also that sense of grounded relatability. And grounded relatability is not something that you always get in a comic strip. Because in a lot of comic strips, what you have is instead something that's just over the top. If you're doing Far Side comics, you're really just looking for that science joke, that wordplay, that, bit of humor that comes from sort of context and collection of what you've got there. And Calvin and Hobbes is, in a lot of ways, fundamentally not really meant to be relatable. It's kind of a thing that's really only relatable if you are a hyperactive, gifted kid. But, instead it's about sort of this look into a overly intelligent child's imagination in such a way that most of us haven't necessarily done. Like, there's the aspect of relatability that children sometimes have an internal life that crosses over into the external in a way that adults don't really understand. But, very Shark Boy and Lava Girl, I suspect. But the thing is that there's still there's a very strong quality of not being grounded in reality. In those, but Garfield is extremely he's extremely steady, phlegmatic. It's there's a solidity to Garfield, a weight, haha, that doesn't have merely to do with the fact that Garfield is extremely fat. It has to do with this style of cartoon and the style of story and the way the dialogue works that really, really grounds these, and you look at them and you see a fellow person with a fellow person's, exhaustion, with a desire to just stay in bed all day because my bed is comfortable. I'm not depressed. I just like being in bed because bed is comfortable. And I like lasagna. It's tasty. I like tasty food. There's this deep seated, id related groundedness to these, and I think it's part of what makes Garfield endlessly relatable is that background heaviness to it, that background's stolidity. So yeah, of course, if you're the kind of person who says Garfield is just making the same three jokes over and over again, sure, you can absolutely feel that way, and you wouldn't necessarily be wrong. But for me, Garfield is just this wonderfully relatable thing in the guise of cat. And so, he's a cat, and I like cats because cats. So, that's everything, and I will see you all next week when hopefully I will have an actual, book finished and read and stuff. I'm working on it, but I get distracted by other things to read that I don't want to put on this channel. So, I will see you all next week.